What do you do when a brand becomes more famous for the woman behind it than for the products it sells? Kate Spade was once the handbag every young woman wanted. Now it's the label everyone wonders about. Its founder's story ended years ago, but her name still lingers on storefronts around the world, attached to a company fighting to stay alive. In our first video, we explored how Kate Spade built an empire, walked away from it, and left behind a brand that corporate owners turned into an outlet commodity. But that was only part of the story. Because in 2025, Kate Spade is still here, struggling with identity, sales, and the shadow of a founder it can never live up to. Just this year, sales dropped by 13%, forcing its parent company to admit the brand needs a reset. So how does a brand survive when its past is more powerful than its present? And can Kate Spade ever escape the weight of its own name? But before we dive into the brand's survival fight today, let's do a quick rewind. Because the story of Kate Spade didn't begin with boardrooms and quarterly losses. It began with a gap in the market and a woman who was tired of the bags she saw around her. In 1993, Kate Spade, a fashion editor with no design training but a clear point of view, launched a line of boxy little handbags with her husband Andy. They were colorful, structured, practical, and, most importantly, fun. Luxury bags at the time were either stiff status symbols or logo-covered statements. Kate Spade offered something different: polish without pretension. Very quickly, the bags were everywhere. Sarah Jessica Parker carried them, magazines loved them, and suddenly young professional women felt they had a brand of their own. Kate Spade wasn't just about a bag. It was about an attitude: optimistic, independent, and playful. By the early 2000s, the brand had grown into clothing, shoes, eyewear, and home decor, selling the idea of a lifestyle as much as a product. But success attracts corporations. First, Neiman Marcus bought in, then Liz Claiborne, and eventually Tapestry. Each takeover brought bigger ambitions: more stores, more outlets, more expansion. At first it worked, but the brand's charm was slowly diluted. What had once felt fresh and special began to feel common. The bigger Kate Spade grew, the harder it became to hold on to what made it feel special. That loss of relevance is now impossible to ignore. In 2025, Kate Spade finds itself in a precarious position. Once the crown jewel of Tapestry's portfolio, the brand has become its weakest link. Recent quarterly sales sank sharply, even as Coach reported double-digit growth in the same period, a widening gap that put both brands in stark contrast. For Tapestry, it was proof of a widening gap. One brand thriving on a sharpened identity, another fading under confusion. The numbers paint the picture, but they don't tell the whole story. Kate Spade still has hundreds of stores, strong name recognition, and a loyal following that remembers its peak. On paper, the brand should be thriving. And yet, it isn't. The real question is why? What caused a label once defined by optimism and playfulness to struggle so visibly today? And how much of that struggle comes down to the decisions and the absence of the woman whose name still hangs above every door? When Tapestry acquired Kate Spade for $2.4 billion in 2017, the promise was simple: repeat the Coach turnaround. Coach had been rescued from its own outlet-driven collapse by refocusing on design, cutting discounts, and creating a sense of scarcity again. On paper, the same plan should have worked for Kate Spade, but Kate Spade was never Coach. Coach's identity rested on leather craftsmanship and heritage, a solid anchor to rebuild around. Kate Spade's identity was more fragile: color, optimism, a playful wink. Fun sells quickly, but it can also date quickly. And once you've trained customers to expect discounts, it's nearly impossible to convince them to pay full price again. The outlets became the clearest symbol of the problem. By the late 2000s and 10s, they weren't just an extra revenue stream. They were the business. More than half of Kate Spade's sales came through off-price channels, and with every 40% off promotion, the brand's sense of exclusivity slipped further away. Consumers learned to wait for sales, and when they did buy at full price, it felt like a mistake. At the same time, the brand's expansion strategy leaned heavily on novelty. The pizza box bag, the telephone purse, the champagne bottle clutch. They went viral on Instagram and, later, TikTok. But these designs blurred the line between clever marketing and gimmickry. They generated attention, but not loyalty. A viral moment sold a few bags, while the core assortment, the boxy, structured staples that once made Kate Spade indispensable, faded quietly into the background. Competitors circled in. Tory Burch sharpened its storytelling with campaigns built on heritage and aspirational lifestyle. Michael Kors, despite its own outlet problem, managed to stay culturally relevant through collaborations and aggressive marketing. Even Coach, once mocked for ubiquity, had rebuilt its reputation by betting on Stuart Vevers' edgier, fashion-forward collections. In that landscape, Kate Spade felt static, stuck between mall brand and luxury player, unsure which audience it truly wanted. The result was a brand spread too thin. Too many outlets, too many discounts, too many novelty bags, and not enough clarity about what Kate Spade stood for. It was proof that growth without discipline can be just as damaging as decline. And it left the brand vulnerable to the one comparison it could never escape: the woman behind the name. For all of Kate Spade New York's corporate maneuvering, the brand has never escaped the shadow of its founder. Even though Kate and Andy Spade had already stepped away in 2006, her name remained on every store sign, every shopping bag, every wallet clasp. Consumers never separated the woman from the label, and the company never really tried to. That choice has carried both power and weight. When news broke in 2018 that Kate Spade had passed away by suicide at 55, it sent shockwaves far beyond fashion. Shoppers who had once bought her bright, optimistic bags now associated the brand with grief. For a time, sales even spiked, proof of how strongly people connected her name to their own memories. But the momentum didn't last. The tragedy only deepened the contrast between a brand built on cheerfulness and the real woman whose struggles had long remained private. It's here that Kate Spade's story differs from most fashion houses. Chanel, Dior, Gucci, their founders are gone, but the brands evolved past them. Kate Spade never had that distance. The company was still young when she stepped away, and her aesthetic was its DNA. Without her touch, every collection risked feeling like imitation. Customers could sense the absence, even if they couldn't name it. Behind the scenes, friends described Kate as warm, witty, and disarmingly normal, but also as someone who struggled quietly with anxiety and depression. Andy Spade later confirmed she had been under treatment and actively seeking help, though others close to her described how deeply she felt things and how private she remained about her inner life. In the years after leaving her brand, she tried to reinvent herself with Frances Valentine, a line of shoes and handbags that echoed her earlier work. It was charming, but it never reached the same heights. For Kate, the separation from her own name was both a legal reality and a personal burden. She couldn't escape the empire she built, even as she tried to start fresh. In the months before her death, her marriage had also become a point of strain. She and Andy were living separately, though he said they were not planning to divorce. That context, combined with the note she left for their daughter, ending with the words, "Ask Daddy," fueled painful speculation. Some family members spoke of depression, others suggested possible bipolar disorder, while Andy insisted she had not shown warning signs beyond her long struggle with anxiety. What united all accounts was the sense of shock. The outwardly bubbly, playful Kate had hidden a much heavier private battle. That tension still lingers today. For younger consumers, Kate Spade is just another mid-tier luxury brand, on the mall circuit. For older ones, the name still conjures the woman herself, her story, her optimism, and her tragic end. It creates a strange paradox. The brand trades on her memory, but it can never live up to her legacy. Which raises the question, how do you rebuild a label when its greatest asset is also its greatest ghost? By 2025, Tapestry could no longer sidestep the truth. Kate Spade was its weakest link. Coach had pulled off a remarkable transformation, becoming a $5 billion powerhouse again by focusing on heritage, craftsmanship, and tight control of distribution. Stuart Weitzman had stabilized. But Kate Spade? Sales fell 13% in the most recent quarter, down to $252 million, a sharp contrast to Coach's 14% growth in the same period. What was supposed to be the group's playful, youth-driven brand had instead become its liability. Tapestry's leadership didn't sugarcoat it. CEO Joanne Crevoiserat told analysts the company would take strategic and financial steps to reset Kate Spade, warning that revenue and profitability would suffer in the short term. In other words, a brand-wide intervention was coming. Investors were asked to be patient, while Tapestry tried to borrow the same discipline that saved its sister brand: fewer SKUs, fewer discounts, a clearer design direction. A staggering $855 million write-down against the brand underscored just how urgent the reset had become. The task fell to Eva Erdmann, appointed president and CEO of Kate Spade in 2024. Erdmann wasn't a household name, but she brought experience at L'Oreal and Urban Decay, where she had scaled lifestyle and beauty brands for younger consumers. Her mandate was simple but brutal. Reconnect the label with Gen Z, a demographic that didn't remember the brand's heyday and barely knew the woman behind the name. Erdmann leaned into splashy, social-first moves, TikTok-friendly novelties like the pickle jar handbag and influencer drops with Ice Spice and Charli D'Amelio aimed to latch Kate Spade to trending culture. But eyeballs don't always translate to loyalty. Behind the likes, the still unanswered question remained: could Kate Spade ever build emotional lastingness the way Coach had? Internally, the company began trimming back styles, a 30% reduction in handbag SKUs, and tried to undo years of overexposure and discounting with tighter assortments meant to rebuild value. They also divested Stuart Weitzman, consolidating focus on their two core brands, Coach and Kate Spade. For investors, that meant the stakes were higher than ever. Financially, the picture was mixed. Tapestry beat overall revenue expectations in 2025, closing the year at $7 billion with projections of $7.2 billion for 2026. But tariff headwinds loomed, with the company warning of as much as $160 million in profitability at risk, a hit that would disproportionately weigh on Kate Spade, whose U.S. manufacturing exposure left it more vulnerable. The deeper problem was harder to solve. Kate Spade had always been more than product. It was an attitude. Optimistic, independent, and fun. Yes, but grounded in a clear point of view. Erdmann's challenge was to translate that spirit into 2025 terms without losing coherence. Too much nostalgia risked making the brand look dated. Too much gimmick risked alienating the core base, who had once embraced Kate Spade as the affordable entry point into aspirational luxury. Even inside the industry, doubts lingered. Could Tapestry really repeat the Coach turnaround on a brand so deeply tied to its founder's story? Coach had heritage leather to fall back on. Kate Spade had a cheerful aesthetic built around a woman who was no longer there. For now, the numbers tell the story. Kate Spade is shrinking while Coach expands, and competitors like Tory Burch keep gaining ground. Erdmann has positioned the brand for a social media generation, but whether that translates into loyalty, sales, and cultural weight is still an open question. Because in 2025, Kate Spade's biggest risk isn't irrelevance. It's becoming a brand people recognize from TikTok, but don't actually buy. The question is, can Kate Spade find a new reason to exist? One that speaks to the future instead of chasing the past? Or will it remain a brand that feels more like a memory than a movement? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.